Hello, and welcome to Lecture 11. At the end of this lecture, you'll be aware of globalization, the rise of unethical practices in the 20th century, along with key concepts like capitalism, socialism, rational and behavioural economics. Those business practices, values and goals, and items that can be perceived to become illegal in the future. And the concept of sustainable development and the function of IMF and WTO. In this lecture, we'll cover how international business activities of an organisation can create unethical behaviour. The world economy had a turbulent time during the first decade of the 21st century, where ethical misconduct and excessive risk-taking seemed rampant. During that period, many stakeholders lost confidence in business due to lack of fairness, trust and honesty. These issues made stakeholders ponder the question of stability of major institutions and the intentions of executives. Also, the competence of government regulatory institutions was called into question during the first decade of the 21st century. During this period, organisations became victim of many unforeseen events due to excessive focus on rewards and the bottom line that influenced the global economy. People were unaware or ignorant about this fact because of their risk compartmentalization. Let's discuss what's meant by risk compartmentalization. Risk compartmentalization occurs when profit centres within an organisation are unaware of the consequences of their decisions on the organisation as a whole. In this case, no single person can be blamed for negative outcomes, as it occurs due to systemic problems. Therefore, lack of trust, honesty and fairness started building in the minds of investors, who began questioning the competence of the organisation, foundation of capitalism, and policies needed to make the system function. The key figures in modern economics are capitalism and socialism. The main forms of capitalism and socialism are derived from the works of Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, and Milton Friedman. They all proposed different theories on capitalism. Adam Smith advocated the idea of laissez-faire capitalism. John Maynard Keynes argued that government can stimulate the private sector. Milton Friedman believed in returning to a self-regulating free market system. Keynes and Friedman agreed that 1. People have rational preferences among outcomes that can be identified and associated with value. 2. Individuals seek to maximise utility and firms seek to maximise profits. 3. People act independently on the basis of full and relevant information. Let's now learn about socialism. Socialism refers to economic theories advocating that wealth and power be shared equally across society based on the amount of work expended in production. Karl Marx was the most famous advocate of socialism. Social democracy formed in the 1940s as an offshoot of socialism. It allows for private ownership of property, but with large government equipped to offer such services as education and healthcare to its citizens. The current global economic system has created a bimodal wealth distribution, which occurs when the middle class shrinks so that there are many poor and a few very wealthy. Considering the impact of globalization, we'll discuss two schools of economic thought, these being rational economics and behavioural economics. 1. Rational economics. It assumes that people are rational and base their decisions on maximising their utility based on the amount of resources available to them. For example, a poor person would use his or her earnings to satisfy their hunger first. 2. Behavioural economics. It assumes that humans do not always act rationally, and also believes that how information is presented can affect people's choices, which is called the framing effect. The irrational act may be because of genetics, learned behaviour, and heuristics, or rules of thumb. This figure shows countries and depicts how their economics and tools have defined happiness and government's role. Each of these countries' definition of happiness is derived from their social democratic goals. And if they are behavioural, it means that they believe very little in laissez-faire. For example, the lower left quadrant represents socialism as a society with behavioural economics as the vehicle towards happiness, where China, Sweden, and the Soviet Union belong. While in the upper left quadrant, you may observe Sweden's shift to capitalism and more laissez-faire economics, and the United States shift to a less laissez-faire economy. Organisational ethics and values are impacted by its country of operation, institutions, social systems, technology, and other cultural factors. The two types of common values are 1. Global common values that are shared across most cultures. 2. Country cultural values that are specific to certain groups that express actions, behaviour, and intent. Culture refers to everything in our surroundings that is made by people. Each nation has a distinctive cultural belief about what business activities are acceptable. However, subcultures can also be found within many nations. Situations in which cultural differences can arise are 1. Transfer of personnel, as transferring personnel to a different location can become a liability for firms. For example, assume that a company's employee is transferred from its office in one country to another country. This employee may face difficulty in adjusting to the values and culture of that country, for example, the type of clothing. 2. Language. Language is one of the significant areas of cultural differences, as a transferred employee may face difficulty in conversing with other parties. 3. Body language. Cultural differences in body language can lead to misunderstandings. For example, the way people greet in one country may be vastly different from that of another country. 4. Time. As the perceptions of time may differ. For example, early or late working hours may not be acceptable in some cultures. However, organisations, in an attempt to maximise profit, may adopt values that do not take into account long-term relationships with stakeholders. Such practice is now a part of major global business. When business people travel, they sometimes perceive that other business cultures have different modes of operation. The perception exists that some companies are different from those in other countries, and some people perceive these companies as being superior to their foreign counterparts. In this context, let's learn about the following types of unethical global business practices. 1. Ethical superiority. 2. Corruption. 3. Dumping of goods and services at lower prices. 4. Culture relativism. 1. Ethical superiority, the implied perspective of ethical superiority. For instance, us versus them is common in other countries. However, in businesses, the idea that we differ from them is called the self-reference criterion, SRC. Self-reference criterion is an unconscious reference to one's own cultural values, experiences, and knowledge. People generally react on the basis of knowledge, which is accumulated over a lifetime grounded in the culture of origin. 2. Corruption. Corruption has nowadays become a prime business ethical issue. A study called the Transparency International Corruptions Index 2008 was conducted to rank the major countries by the perception of level of corruption. The study was conducted over business people, risk analysts, and the general public. Here, Denmark was voted as the least corrupt, and Somalia was ranked as the most corrupt country in the world. 3. Dumping of goods and services at lower prices. Dumping is the practice of charging high prices for products sold in domestic markets while selling the same product in foreign markets at low prices, often below the cost for exporting them. The USA has multiple anti-dumping laws to curb this practice. Similar to the USA, anti-dumping laws are also in place in Australia. The Anti-Dumping Commission of Australia investigates alleged dumping and subsidisation of goods imported into Australia and imposes duties to address material injury to the Australian industry that manufactures similar or the same goods. 4. Cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is the concept that morality varies from one culture to another. The country in which you operate may stray from their own ethical values when doing business abroad. For example, a manager while working in a home country observed all ethical practice. However, when transferred to a foreign country, gets influenced by the prevailing environment and thus starts accepting favours or bribes. The two forms of cultural relativism are 1. Adherence to single ethical culture, and 2. No rules defined for ethics. Some believe that only one culture defines ethical behaviour for the whole globe, while for the business relativist, there may be no ethical standards except for the one in the transaction culture, or none at all. Such business people may be in conflict with their own individual moral standards. Individuals may adjust to the ethics of a particular foreign culture, or use their own culture as a defence against something unethical as perceived in the foreign country. Due to this, individuals may get confused with their own moral standard or their cultural values and legal system. The global potential for unethical and illegal decisions can be depicted in a 2x2 matrix. For example, rapid growth and poverty reduction in developing countries is a positive aspect of globalization. But globalization has also generated many environmental concerns, such as global warming. The decision to dispose untreated waste into a fresh water stream may be considered an unethical or illegal action in the home country as well as in the foreign country. Therefore, an individual should have no confusion that his or her decision should be unethical or illegal. No company, country or culture is immune to ethical issues. However, some are obvious while others are not. The list of topics not inclusive includes the items perceived to become illegal in the future are 1. Consumerism, 2. Human rights, 3. Healthcare, 4. Labour. Let's commence our discussion with consumerism. Consumerism is the belief that consumers, not the interest of corporations, should dictate the economic structure of society. It refers to the belief that consumption of goods relates to increased well-being. Made-to-break or planned obsolescence encourages consumers to regularly buy more items. Therefore, consumerism is meeting with a backlash because of increased sustainability concerns. 2. Human rights. Human rights is defined as an inherent dignity that should be afforded by all people with equal and inalienable rights as the foundation of freedom, justice and peace in the world. Human rights have been codified in the United Nations Human Rights Declaration. 3. Healthcare. Healthcare is a major global human rights issue. The issue of healthcare availability and affordability for workers in all nations is becoming a major source of concern. The question remains of whether access to healthcare is a right or a privilege. 4. Labour. Today, more people live and work in a country other than their homeland for doing business. Firms today have many ethical concerns involving labour issues. A corporation must always know where the labour comes from in its entire supply chain so as to avoid controversy. Corporations that do not take labour issues seriously will find themselves in legal and ethical trouble. Now we'll learn about the meaning and importance of sustainable development. Sustainable development is a systemic approach of achieving development in such a way that the Earth's resources are preserved for future generations. Sustainable development is a serious future issue for most firms. Therefore, some companies conduct their own sustainability performance reports to safeguard their future. The sustainable development concept has gained a high level of international recognition through the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, MA, initiated by the former United Nations Secretary-General, Kofi Annan. The questions asked in this report are: 1. What are the current condition and trends of ecosystems, ecosystem services and human well-being? 2. What are plausible future changes in ecosystems and their ecosystem services and the consequent changes in human well-being? 3. What can be done to enhance well-being and conserve ecosystems? 4. What are the strengths and weaknesses of response options that can be considered to realise or avoid specific futures? And 5. What are the key uncertainties that hinder effective decision-making concerning ecosystems? Due to globalization, national organizations started trading in international markets with an objective of profit maximization. The organizations that facilitate and monitor trade among different nations are the International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization. We'll now discuss the role and function of these two institutions. The IMF emerged from the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. The IMF assumed a major role in the 1980s in the management of the less developed countries, LDC, debt crisis. An ethical issue surrounding the IMF has to do with the increased inequality in less developed countries. Subscribing to an unethical practice, some contend that foreign corporations offload their debt via IMF bailouts. Next, we'll discuss the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization was established in 1995 and now includes 133 member nations and 33 others with observer status. It administers its own trade agreements, facilitates future trading negotiations, settles trade disputes, and monitors the trade policies of member nations. It addresses economic and social issues in a broad range of industries. Till now, we've learnt about international trade and ethical conflicts arising from trade between countries with a view to maximise profit. Now let's learn about the multinational corporations, for instance, entities that trade or set up their business in different countries. Multinational corporations are public companies that operate on a global scale without significant ties to any one nation or region. The multinational corporation represents the highest level of international business commitment. MNCs are subject to ethical criticism over their impact on the countries in which they do business. Because of increased scrutiny and pressure to be socially responsible, many corporations subscribe to business for social responsibility. The above table displays the world's largest countries by GDP and largest corporations by revenue based on the 2008 IMF country ranking and CIA World Factbook 2009. In this lecture, you've gained an awareness of the rise of unethical practices and key concepts including capitalism, socialism, rational and behavioural economics. We've also addressed business practice, values and goals, and the concept of sustainable development in the future. Thank you for taking the time to view this lecture.